All right, Alexander, we have got to talk about what's going on with Iran. There's a lot of activity on a lot of different fronts. I think the most there's a JCPOA, there's that, but the most high-profile activity, the most pressing activity that is taking place recently, is this Mercer Street tanker and the accusations from Israel, the United States, as well as Europe. Many countries in Europe are that Iran attacked this Mercer Street tanker. The Iranians are, of course, denying this. And the United Nations, the Security Council, is very split, as is expected. And some countries would like a stronger response against Iran. Other countries are saying we need an investigation. A lot of activity in and around Iran. There is also a lot of activity and the news coming out of Iran internally, and they have some issues internally as well with a water crisis, and this is complicating their foreign policy hurdles and obstacles as well. So it's all things are hard for Iran right now. What do you make of what's going on?
Absolutely. And I think this is where we need to put in context this episode with the tanker. Now, first of all, I don't know.
And a new president.
And a new president. Well, all of this comes together because let's just turn, first of all, to the tanker incident. This is an apparently Israeli-owned tanker. It's in the Gulf. It was attacked by drones. Now, there are lots of people in that part of the world who possess drones, but it could very easily have been Iran. It might have been, by the way, the Houthis in Yemen, but then the Houthis in Yemen are widely believed to be connected to Iran too. And in this part of the world, I'm afraid you can't either discount entirely the possibility that it's a false flag too, by any number of different people. I'm not going to even start to speculate who. And that's probably why, by the way, the UN Security Council is split on this issue, with some people saying there needs to be an investigation. But let us, for the sake of argument, assume that it was Iran, which, despite its denials, is a likely suspect. This attack on a tanker would not be unprecedented, and it comes in the context of a covert tanker war that Israel and Iran have been waging against each other for some time. And it's widely known that the Israelis have sabotaged Iranian tankers, especially Iranian tankers that have been shipping oil to Syria. And it's also now widely known that the Iranians eventually were forced to call on the Russians, and that the Russians have provided naval escorts for some of those Iranian tankers that have been shipping oil to Syria. And it's given the fact that there is this covert tanker war going on, given also that there's a very widely known that there's a covert war going on between Iran and Israel in Syria, with the Israelis firing missiles at what they say are Iranian targets, and Iranian special forces operating in Syria and fighting Iranian special forces there. And given also that it's fairly widely known also that Israel has carried out assassinations and sabotage operations in Iran itself, it would not be completely surprising or out of the ordinary if along the way an Israeli-owned tanker in the Gulf were attacked by the Iranians in this way. The issue is not who did it, to my mind. It's why is this suddenly become an important issue, so important that there is now serious talk of a possible attack, a possible military response against Iran itself. And you're hearing all these warnings and threats which have been pouring out of various capitals, including Israel, by the way, which is that they say that there might actually be some kind of a military démarche as a result of all of this. So why is this happening? Why are they making this big issue about it? And I think it is because over the last few weeks, and I say this very advisedly, I think that there has been a decision made by certain leaders and perhaps certain governments, certainly the Israeli government, which is that the policy should no longer be trying to come to some kind of accommodation with Iran. It is instead to seek regime change in Iran. And there is a very important clue to that effect, which is that an Israeli ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, has actually come out openly and said for the first time that what Israel wants to see in Iran is regime change. And I think the reason that is happening is multiple-fold. Firstly, I think when the new administration came to office in the United States back in January, I think they thought that they could use the JCPOA negotiations to force Iran into various concessions. And they found that the Iranians were not prepared to make those concessions. And I think that's basically solidified a belief in the United States that any kind of accommodation with Iran or with the present government in Iran is impossible. I think also that they've been looking at the internal situation in Iran. They noticed that hardliners, or people that are called hardliners, like Ebrahim Raisi, who is the new president, have come to power in Iran. They noticed that Raisi and the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, have been saying that the United States cannot be trusted in negotiations, and have been talking about Iran opening up to the Eurasian powers and pursuing economic deals with China and military deals with Russia. And of course, Iran last year negotiated this massive infrastructure program with Iran. So I think they've come to see this government in Iran as implacably hostile and not prepared to deal with the United States in the way the United States wants. And at the same time, they also sense that the government itself in Iran is fragile. The turnout in the presidential elections was very low. It was below 50%. There are major protests in Iran because of the water management issue, especially in the southern province of Khuzestan. There is also a widespread feeling amongst many Iranians that the economy has been very badly mismanaged, and the government itself, the supreme leader, the president, the new president, have acknowledged as much. And by the way, they're saying that the previous president, Rouhani, gave too much emphasis to negotiating with the United States and getting the sanctions lifted, and as a result neglected the issue of building up Iran's economy. So I think that the regime change community, if you like, sense that there is an opportunity because the situation in Iran looks fragile. And at the same time, those people in the United States who were perhaps more willing to be accommodating towards Iran and to seek some sort of rapprochement with Iran have been confounded because they found the Iranians taking a harder line in the negotiations than they expected. So I think now, from this point on, the emphasis once more is on regime change, and this is why this episode of the tanker is being talked up in this way.
Yeah, so you have a new Israeli prime minister, so that's changed. We're going to see how they move forward with their foreign policy vis-a-vis Iran. You have a new Iranian president as well. We're going to see how that unfolds and how their foreign policy goes forward vis-a-vis Israel, the United States, Europe. You have the potato in chief in the White House as well. And the JCPOA, it's done. Are we done with this?
I think we are. I mean, there was a chance that it could be cobbled together again. There was a brief opening after the U.S. administration came to office when it looked as if it might be patched together. It was never very easy to do. And it looks like the Iranians have lost interest in it. They've pretty much made it clear that they're only prepared to return to it on the basis of what was agreed by Obama back in 2015. The new administration is not prepared to do that. And the new president in Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, and the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, have basically given up on it. So it looks like the JCPOA is dead, and certainly there won't be an agreement this year. I mean, that's what everybody seems to be saying, and that's the way it looks. By the way, there's been criticism from every party of the British, who acted as mediators in the negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians at the talks in Vienna. And there's also been criticism of the European Union, with everybody saying that the British and the Europeans made a complete botch up of the mediation exercise. Well, that could just be everybody blaming everybody for things that have gone wrong. But I think the JCPOA is done. I think it's history.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the water crisis, the drought, Kazakhstan, and what took place there and what is taking place there. And it really does remind me of how they got the whole Syrian conflict started. It was pretty much the same thing. This is, for the Iranian people, for the Iranian government, this is a red flag, I believe. They need to really start to take care of their country and their internal well-being, their economics, their basic supplies and services, the well-being of the people, because if they do not, then incidents like what we're seeing in Kazakhstan is going to open the door for regime change, for war, for conflict, for God knows what. But we saw this exact playbook in Syria, and there's no doubt that all these people that would like to see a regime change in Iran are just waiting for more things like this to happen internally in Iran so that they can pounce. You know, this opens the door to that regime change that they're looking for. So they really need to start focusing internally rather than dealing with JCPOAs and stuff like that. I don't know. That's the way I'm seeing it right now. I wonder if the leadership understands this.
I think you are totally right, and the leadership, at least the new leadership, actually say exactly that. They're making exactly that point. They're saying that the previous President Rouhani, and his government, instead of actually focusing on developing Iran's economy, sorting out the issues of supply, sorting out, the problems, the water problems, all those sort of problems, got completely absorbed negotiating over the JCPOA and looking for sanctions relief as the solution to Iran's problems. And the new government says this isn't really the way forward. We're never going to get that degree of sanctions relief. The only way that for us to work and to proceed is to focus instead on developing and sorting out the internal problems of our own economy, giving people in Iran a material reason to stick by us and to stick by their country, by Iran, rather than wasting time negotiating with the US and with the Western powers, which will get nowhere. Now, that is right. I mean, from their point of view, you're absolutely right. That is what they should do. That makes complete sense. The problem is that saying all of these things is one thing, implementing them is something completely different. And the Iranian government, no part of the Iranian government up to now has shown any great brilliance or skill in administration and in economic management. So, they've got to work to get their house in order. But it's, past experience suggests that they're not terribly good at doing that sort of thing. My sense of the way it looks to me with Iran is that the Iranians are utterly brilliant in the work of intelligence, of sending, secret agents around the Middle East, doing all that sort of thing. They are the great masters of covert warfare. They have extremely good diplomats. I mean, some very fine diplomats. They have what, by Middle East standards, are very well-run armed forces. I mean, even despite the fact that many of the weapon systems they use are very antiquated. So they're good at that sort of thing. They're good at the sort of external side of what a government does. But the internal aspects of it, I suspect the problem is that they just get bored by it. I mean, and the major power centers in Iran aren't prepared, the people who run them aren't really interested in the hard grind of sorting out water problems, making sure that, the tax system works efficiently, it doesn't choke off entrepreneurial activity, sorting out supply chains, building up structures, operating the banking and financial system in an effective way. There are plenty of good technocrats in Iran. There is all the technical knowledge you need in Iran to do these things. Iran even has developed by itself its own interbank payment system to replace SWIFT, for example, which is, quite a big technical achievement. But the political leadership has never shown the degree of interest and skill in that sort of thing that it has shown in the conduct of Iran's external policies. So they've got to learn to do that, and they've got to focus more on those things. We'll see whether they can. They do understand the importance. Intellectually, they've understood it. Whether, they actually are prepared to put that understanding into action, well, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. They've never been able to get their house in order so that they can deal with the sanctions effectively. Like, for example, how Russia has dealt with the sanctions. I'm saying Russia's a much bigger country, has more resources, but still, they've never been able. They have all the sanctions that come at them. They know the sanctions are going to come at them. They know it. It's a given. Every 3 to 6 months, they're going to get sanctions. Fine, but they've never been able to get their house in order so that they could get past the sanctions and start building a country that is independent of the Western powers, and a country that would not be affected by these sanctions. So they're kind of stuck there. They're also a little bit stuck and boxed in with the JCPOA in that, even though the JCPOA is all but I don't want to say dead, it's diminishing, they're going to get blamed for it. In other words, the more this thing drags out, the narrative is going to be Iran is building a bomb.
Yeah.
It's just going to be the narrative from now
Absolutely.
on, because the JCPOA is just kind of fading away. So it's going to be Iran is going to build a bomb. So they're in a little bit of a difficult position, it seems. And my final point to all that is they've done a good job in staving off numerous regime change efforts, various uprisings and protests, and they've done a good job in getting past that. But 1, 2, 3 strikes. When is the next one going to really hold? You don't know.
Well, that's an excellent point. And of course, you've got to also bear in mind that the elections in Iran, which were very, very heavily manipulated this time. I mean, the Iranian political leadership was absolutely determined to get a reliable person, that's to say Ebrahim Raisi, in. And they made sure that he went into the election without any challenges. And as a result, he won a landslide. But he did so in a way that caused turnout to collapse. And that has left him with a legitimacy deficit. So, I mean, they've got the right person there. They've perhaps got a more solid government now as a result, which is perhaps better because Iranian government is very factionalized and divided. But the price has been a degree of legitimacy, which perhaps previous Iranian leaders to some extent had, and that's been to a certain extent weakened. And, they have been successful in coping with regime change situations in Iran up to now. And there are 2 reasons for this. Firstly, there has always up to now, and I think just about still is, a critical mass of the Iranian population, which either supports the present political system or at least doesn't want it to be changed in a way that could be seen to be a restoration of the previous system which existed in Iran up to the 1970s, and which opens up the way for the United States to become the dominant power in Iran again. It's important to stress that Iran is a very historically minded society. Iranian memories stretch very far, and it's also a very proud country. So, I mean, there is a critical mass of people who think like that. There's also a lot of very religious people in Iran who support the political system in Iran for that reason too. We mustn't discount that. But the other reason they've been able to prevail against regime change attempts is because they also have a very sophisticated and very ruthless internal security apparatus. I mean, they have a very elaborate police networks, they have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, they have all the various paramilitary groups that are structured to maintain control. So when, for example, there was an attempted color revolution in Iran back in 2009, all of these parts of the security apparatus were brought into play. And of course, the government survived, the political system survived and saw it off. Now, that system of internal control is still in place. But the continuous lesson we learn from regime change attempts is that by itself, a strong security system, though it is an essential factor in staving off regime change attempts, it cannot do it by itself. You still need a critical level of support within the population. You need both. You can't just rely on your security forces. And the danger is that that level of support within Iran, because of all these problems, is starting to peel away, and that the government is going to become over-dependent on the security forces. And of course, the background of Raisi as a very hardline judge, some people even called him the butcher of Tehran, but that's, to my mind, almost entirely a Western conceit as far as I can see. But, he's certainly got a background as a, tough figure in that respect, that may suggest that, as they're going to rely too much on the security dimension and not enough on the economic and social dimension, even though they need to do both. Intellectually, they need to do both. But as I said, the security side of things, they're really good at. Whereas the economic side of things, they're just bored by. At least they have been up to now. I mean, what they need to do is they need to do what Putin does. And you're absolutely right, by the way, to contrast Russia and Iran. And Iran has many of the same features that Russia does. It's not as developed a country, not as rich a country. It doesn't have the resources that Russia does. But Iran does have a lot of resources. But they need to be prepared to do what Putin does, which is work 15 hours a day on sorting out things like a law, on a tax law, on getting the tax system sorted out, on getting the banking system sorted out. That is the hard grind, which is the essence of government, and explains why Russia is essentially regime change proof and Iran is not.
Yeah, they've got to do the small things.
Yeah,
in order to get the big results, the grind, the daily grind.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. Everybody, check us out on theduran.locals.com. You'll find the link down below. We're going to be having all kinds of great content on Locals very, very soon. So look for us there. It is free to join. It's free to consume all the content that we currently have on YT. It's on Locals as well. That and a lot more, because you get a lot of the community contributions as well to the Locals feed. So theduran.locals.com. BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and the free speech video platform, SuperU. Look for us on those new media platforms. They're all fantastic. Choose the one that you like best. We are posting there daily as well. So find us there. And of course, the Duran shop. Pick up a magic hat, There you go. This is Switzerland or a magic mug, Alexander. This one is
Absolutely,
Serbia.
magic mugs, and as I said, they're the best T-shirts and hoodies and hats in the world. But those and our mugs are phenomenal and famous. But those caps, I am anxiously waiting mine, and I'm green with envy when I see Alex holding them and wearing them at the moment, because they are fantastic. They look amazing. They are made to the same quality as everything else we have on our shop, and they're the best hats in the world.
All right. You'll find the link down below, 10% off. Use the code. Real news. Take care.